The air in the room is thick, like humid, poisonous gas. My hands, clammy and trembling slightly, grip the edges of the polished mahogany desk. Across from me, his face, usually a mask of composed superiority, is draining of color, a sickly gray spreading beneath the surface of his skin. His eyes, wide with a terror I've never seen him exhibit, fix on the woman standing beside me, a silent sentinel. Her expression is calm, almost serene, but there's an unnerving stillness about her, a predator's patience. A low sound, a strangled gasp, escapes his lips, and then, slow and heavy, he begins to list to the side, a grand old tree finally succumbing to a relentless storm. The heavy thud as his body hits the expensive Persian rug echoes in the sudden, deafening silence, a final punctuation mark on a sentence years in the making. The woman beside me doesn't flinch. She simply watches him lie there, crumpled and still, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching the corner of her mouth. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if you haven't already felt the pull to subscribe, please, it helps me more than you know. Before the collapse, before the stillness, there was just life. A life that felt, for a long time, perfectly ordinary. Almost idyllic if you squinted. My world was a series of soft edges and muted colors, a comfortable hum of routine. I had my work, a quiet but fulfilling career in data analysis. Numbers made sense to me, they were predictable, reliable, unlike people. I had my small apartment filled with books and plants, a sanctuary I carefully curated. And then I met him. He swept in like a force of nature, loud, charismatic, full of grand pronouncements about the future. He was everything I wasn't. Bold, confident, seemingly fearless. He saw my quiet competence, my steady hand with detail, and called it potential. My friends, my family, they warned me. They saw the ambition that bordered on ruthlessness, the charm that felt a little too practiced. But I was caught in the current of his energy. He made me feel seen at first. He said he admired my mind, my focus, my potential. He spoke of us building an empire together, combining his vision with my practicality. It was intoxicating. We married quickly, a whirlwind romance that left me breathless and slightly disoriented. The early days were a dizzying ascent. He was building his real estate development firm, and I, with my knack for spreadsheets and market analysis, became his silent partner, the one who crunched the numbers, spotted the risks, and organized the chaos he left in his wake. I worked tirelessly, late nights poring over projections, structuring deals, anticipating pitfalls. His success became our success, or so he said. He was the face, the voice, the one who closed the deals with a handshake and a dazzling smile. I was the engine hidden beneath the hood, making sure the machine actually ran. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the language changed. The initial admiration for my mind morphed into backhanded compliments about my support, my work, once lauded as essential, became helpful. My hours spent ensuring his ventures didn't crumble were framed not as contributions to a partnership, but as holding down the fort, while he did the real work of making things happen. The shift was insidious. It started with small comments, tossed out casually over dinner. "It's sweet how you worry about the details, darling, but someone has to focus on the big picture," or when I pointed out a significant financial risk. "That's why I have you, isn't it? To find problems. But finding solutions, that's my job." He began to chip away at my confidence, disguised as concern. If I expressed an ambition outside of supporting his career, a desire to take on a more public role, or even just invest in my own skills independent of his firm, the comments would sharpen. "Are you sure you're cut out for that, sweetheart? It's a tough world out there. Maybe stick to what you're good at," or, more damningly, delivered with a sigh, "I just worry you don't have the presence, the grit needed for that kind of thing." He didn't forbid me. He simply made me doubt if I was capable. He told me, without saying the words, that I wasn't built for more. I was built for the quiet, the background, the support. The apartment I loved became too small once he moved in. My carefully curated books were deemed clutter. My quiet evenings were interrupted by his endless networking events, where I was expected to smile, look pretty, and listen while he held court. My identity began to shrink, compressed into the role of the developer's wife, the quiet woman with the sensible shoes and the slightly nervous smile standing just behind the man in the spotlight. The real estate market fluctuated. There were wins, big, flashy wins he trumpeted from the rooftops. And there were near disasters, crises averted only because I'd stayed up for 3 days straight, untangling a financial mess or spotting a loophole he'd overlooked. He'd take the credit for the save, of course. My exhaustion was just stress. His brilliance was vision. The comments escalated from casual dismissal to outright judgment. My ideas, my suggestions, even when they were based on solid data, were met with polite, sometimes not so polite, condescension. That's an interesting thought, darling, but let's be realistic. Or after a meeting where I tentatively offered an analysis, you really need to learn to articulate your points more clearly. You get lost in the weeds. The implication was clear. My thoughts, my voice, myself were not valuable enough to be heard, not strong enough to stand on their own. I started to believe him. That's the insidious part of this kind of slow drip poison. You start to see yourself through their eyes. I looked in the mirror and saw someone lacking, someone who wilted under pressure, someone fundamentally unsuited for the spotlight, or even just for standing tall in the sun. My career stalled. My personal projects faded. My world became smaller, revolving entirely around his orbit. One evening, after a particularly grueling week where I'd single-handedly salvaged a deal that would have cost him millions, I made the mistake of expressing a flicker of my old ambition. I mentioned a conference I wanted to attend, a chance to reconnect with my own field, away from his shadow. He was sprawled on the sofa, scrolling through emails, barely looking up. "That sounds nice, darling," he murmured, his tone dismissive. "But honestly, do you think that's a good use of your time right now? We have so much going on here. And besides," he finally looked at me, his eyes cold and assessing, "I just don't think you have what it takes to really make a splash in that world. It's cutthroat. You're not enough for that. You're enough for this. For me. Isn't that enough?" The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. You're not enough. Not for the world. Not for anything beyond serving his needs. Just enough for me, which I now understood meant just useful enough to keep around. It wasn't delivered in anger, but with a kind of weary certainty, as if stating a simple, undeniable fact of nature. That was the inciting incident. Not a single explosive argument, but a quiet car-gotten sentence that severed the last thread of my self-belief. He had judged me, found me wanting, and delivered the verdict with bland finality. You're not enough. The days and weeks that followed were a blur of quiet despair. His words echoed in my head, a constant, corrosive whisper. Not enough. Not enough. Not enough. I went through the motions, managing his calendar, sorting his contracts, being the silent, supportive wife. But inside, something had broken. And something else, something hard and brittle, was beginning to form in its place. I tried, initially, to prove him wrong within the constraints he'd set. I worked harder, stayed up later, tried to anticipate his every need, solve every problem before he even saw it. I thought if I could just be indispensable, if I could make the machine run so perfectly that he had no choice but to acknowledge my contribution, maybe then he would see my worth. Maybe then I would be enough. It was a desperate, exhausting effort. He barely seemed to notice. Or, if he did, he took it as his due. My efforts only seemed to reinforce his perception of me as the quiet workhorse, valuable for my labor, not for my intellect or ambition. The early struggles were lonely. I couldn't talk to my friends, not really. How do you explain that the man you married, the man everyone sees as successful and charming, is slowly dismantling your soul piece by piece? They'd see the nice apartment, the fancy parties, the expensive clothes, and think I was living the dream. They wouldn't see the invisible cage, the constant pressure to be less, to need less, to be less. My family, they'd always been cautious about him. Admitting they were right felt like admitting I was a failure. So I kept it inside, the simmering resentment, the gnawing doubt. I tried small acts of rebellion. I started waking up earlier, working on my old data projects for an hour before his day began. I'd lose myself in the clean logic of numbers, a world where my value wasn't measured by his gaze. But even that felt furtive, stolen time. He'd noticed the slightly earlier light under my office door, the faint clicking of the keyboard. Up early, darling? Don't overdo it. You look tired, another subtle reminder to stay within bounds, to conserve my energy for his needs. The pressure mounted. His business hit a rough patch. Interest rates rose, a major deal fell through, and his usual bluster started to fray at the edges. He became more volatile, his criticisms sharper, his demands more unreasonable. The careful boundary I tried to maintain around my own time crumbled. He needed me constantly, pulling me into endless crisis management, snapping at me when I wasn't fast enough, smart enough to fix his problems instantly. One night, after he'd spent an hour railing at me because a report I'd warned him about months ago had finally bitten him, he sank back into his chair, looking exhausted and defeated. "I don't know why I bother," he muttered, not quite to me, but loud enough to be heard. "It just feels like I'm surrounded by incompetence," I flinched. "I'm doing my best," I said, my voice quiet. He scoffed. "Your best? Is that what this is? Maybe your best isn't good enough." That was the midpoint shift. It wasn't a sudden revelation, but a slow dawning, like watching a distant ship finally appear on the horizon. His words, delivered with that familiar, weary disdain, landed differently this time. They didn't just wound, they clarified. He wasn't trying to help me improve. He wasn't trying to protect me from failure. He needed me to believe I wasn't enough, because as long as I believed it, I would stay small, stay hidden, stay dependent on him. My perceived inadequacy was his control mechanism. And in that moment, I realized with chilling clarity, I would never be enough for him. Not because of any inherent flaw in me, but because my lack was essential to his sense of self, to his power over me. The only way to be enough was to step entirely outside of his definition. The shift was internal, a hardening of the core. The hurt didn't disappear, but it was overlaid with a layer of cold, calculated resolve. I stopped trying to prove him wrong to him. I started focusing on proving him wrong to myself. And then, eventually, to the world. The rising challenges were immediate. As I subtly began to withdraw my emotional energy from his drama, to prioritize my own time, to respond to his criticisms with quiet nods instead of desperate explanations, he sensed the change. His control tightened. He questioned where I was going, who I was talking to. He jokingly suggested I wasn't pulling my weight. He started talking about taking over the financial side of his business entirely, claiming I was overwhelmed. This wasn't about helping me. It was about removing my access to the information, to the engine room. He wanted to make me redundant even in my quiet, hidden role. The walls of the cage felt like they were closing in. He started leaving sensitive documents lying around, tests disguised as carelessness. He'd ask me to handle minor tasks related to his personal finances, but keep the crucial business accounts locked down. He wanted me to be a simple administrator, not an analyst, not a partner. He wanted me to be easily replaced, easily dismissed. The deepening crisis hit when I realized how thoroughly he had isolated me. My friends had drifted away, tired of my excuses for not seeing them, or put off by his condescending manner when they did come over. My family were still wary, and I was too ashamed to confess the true extent of my unhappiness. I was alone, trapped in a life I no longer recognized, with a man who seemed determined to shrink me into nothingness. He started hinting about simplifying things, maybe downsizing, maybe me focusing solely on managing the household. The subtext was clear. He was preparing to phase me out entirely or reduce me to a decorative, unpaid domestic servant. He spoke about his future, always using I, never we. His plans had no room for my growth, my desires, my very self. I was reaching the bottom. The feeling of not being enough wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was a roaring, suffocating presence, filling every corner of my existence. I felt utterly powerless. Everything I had built, everything I had sacrificed, felt like it was being erased, leaving only a void. I was a ghost in my own life. The turning point came during a sleepless night. I was lying awake, the familiar knot of anxiety and despair twisting in my stomach. His soft, steady breathing beside me felt like a mockery. He was resting peacefully, utterly unaware of the storm raging inside me, a storm he had created. I thought about his words, "You're not enough." I thought about the years of quiet dismissal, the slow erosion of my spirit. I thought about the cage he had built around me, brick by careful brick. And then a different thought surfaced. It wasn't about proving him wrong. It wasn't about being enough by his standards. It was about dismantling the cage. Not just escaping it, but taking it apart, piece by careful piece. It wouldn't be enough to leave. He would simply move on, find someone else to mold, someone else to tell wasn't enough. The score wouldn't be settled. For years, I had used my analytical mind, my ability to spot patterns and connect disparate pieces of information, to protect him. Now I would use it to protect myself. And then, to strike. My plan began to form in the pre-dawn quiet, a cold, intricate design. It wasn't born of rage, but of something much colder: calculation. He had shown me his weaknesses, his blind spots. He was arrogant, overconfident, and sloppy where he thought it didn't matter. He trusted me with his messes, never realizing I was quietly cataloging them. I knew where the bodies were buried, not literal bodies, but financial ones, ethical ones. I knew about the questionable deals, the corners cut, the people he had stepped on, sometimes crushed, on his way to the top. The key piece was information. He was always careless with digital trails, relying on my discretion to clean them up. I had copies of everything. Every shady email, every dubious contract, every communication that skirted the edges of legality or ethics. For years, I had filed them away, a meticulous digital archivist for his transgressions, never knowing why, just knowing that some part of my analyst brain couldn't bear the thought of loose ends. Now I knew why. This was my leverage. This was my weapon. But leverage wasn't enough. I needed a catalyst, someone who could turn information into action, someone who understood his world, someone he wouldn't see coming, someone who had reason to see him fall. I started my research subtly, late at night after he was asleep, using burner phones and encrypted connections. I looked into the past deals he was most secretive about, the people he dismissed with a wave of his hand, the names I was told never to mention. There was one name that kept surfacing, connected to a failed project years ago that had ruined several investors. A woman, a sharp, formidable woman who had lost everything, publicly, thanks to one of his brilliant maneuvers. Her name was Evelyn. I found her. It took weeks, navigating layers of privacy and burned bridges. She was working quietly now, a consultant keeping a low profile. Her public profile was wiped clean, a testament to the damage he had inflicted. But her reputation among those who knew her true capabilities was still intact. She was known for being ruthless, brilliant, and having an elephant's memory for grievances. I contacted her through a secure channel, laying out my proposition carefully, clinically. I didn't beg for help. I presented a business opportunity. I had the information. She had the expertise and, crucially, the motive. I explained what I needed. Not just an escape, but a dismantling. A reversal. I needed her to help me turn his world upside down, using the very foundations he had built on lies and exploitation. Our first meeting was in a neutral location, a quiet cafe far from his usual haunts. Evelyn was exactly as I had imagined. Cool, observant, radiating a quiet power. She listened without interruption as I presented my findings, the documentation I had secretly compiled over the years. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the files. When she finished, she looked up, a flicker of something unreadable in her gaze. "He ruined me," she said, her voice low and steady. "He took everything. My career, my reputation, my peace of mind." "I know," I replied. "He's been trying to do the same to me. He says I'm not enough. A slow smile spread across her face, a genuine, chilling smile that didn't reach her eyes. Not enough, she repeated, a hint of ice in her tone. Oh, he has no idea just how much you and this information are going to be. We spent weeks planning, meeting in secret, building our strategy. It was like building a complex piece of machinery, every gear clicking into place. Evelyn knew the pressure points in his business, the regulatory bodies who would be very interested in certain documents, the investors who would flee at the first hint of scandal. My knowledge of his internal operations, combined with her understanding of the external landscape, made for a potent combination. The assistant role was the perfect Trojan horse. He needed someone competent to handle the administrative chaos I was slowly withdrawing from, someone he could trust with the periphery while he guarded the core. He wanted a simple organizer. I would give him one. Evelyn would come in under a false name, with a carefully constructed backstory. Her references were impeccable, sourced from a network of people who also had reasons to dislike my husband. Her resume was impressive, but slightly understated, designed to appear highly capable but not overly ambitious, exactly what he thought he wanted in a support role. She was overqualified, of course, but that just made her seem more reliable. The turning point had shifted from a quiet realization to active preparation. Every day felt like walking a tightrope. I had to continue playing the part of the quiet, obedient wife, the slightly not enough woman, while secretly orchestrating his downfall. The dry humor I sometimes employed became a shield, deflecting his probing questions. The dramatic tension was a constant companion. I posted the job opening for an executive assistant. He barely glanced at it. Just find someone competent, darling. Someone who won't make a fuss. He was so focused on his big-picture problems, he didn't pay attention to the details of his own office staff. Evelyn applied. I made sure her application landed on my desk, not his. I conducted the interview myself, in our apartment, while he was out. It felt surreal, sitting across from the woman who would help me dismantle my life with him. She was perfect. Professional, sharp, utterly convincing in her slightly subdued persona. We spoke in veiled terms, layers of meaning beneath the surface of standard interview questions. My last role was challenging, she said, referring to the company my husband had helped tank. I learned a great deal about navigating complex situations and managing difficult personalities. Complex situations are our bread and butter here, I replied, a small, private smile playing on my lips. And managing unique personalities is definitely a requirement. I hired her on the spot. Bringing her into the office was the next hurdle. I handled all the onboarding, minimizing his direct interaction. I introduced her simply as Evelyn Miller, my new assistant. He gave her a cursory glance, a dismissive nod. He saw a competent-looking woman in sensible clothes, someone who fit his mental image of background staff. He saw a reflection of the not enough energy he had cultivated in me. He saw what he wanted to see. He had no idea. Evelyn, as my assistant, was brilliant. She was efficient, organized, and utterly discreet. She anticipated my needs, handled scheduling conflicts, and streamlined processes with quiet competence. She was everything I had promised him I would find. But beneath the surface, she was working. Using her access, guided by the information I provided, she began to subtly verify details, cross-reference documents, and identify the key players who would be crucial when we initiated our plan. She was a ghost in his system, leaving no trace. She saw his interactions, witnessed his casual cruelty to staff, his arrogance. It only fueled her cold resolve. The rising challenges now came from a different direction. I had to manage his increasing suspicion about my own changed demeanor while also coordinating with Evelyn under his nose. He sensed a shift in the power dynamic, even if he didn't understand it. He tried to assert control in new ways, demanding spontaneous appearances at events, going through my calendar. I deflected, using the excuse of needing my assistant to manage my schedule. The deepening crisis wasn't just about his control anymore. It was about the sheer pressure of maintaining the deception. Living a double life was exhausting. Pretending to be the quiet wife while plotting his downfall felt like a constant performance. There were moments of doubt, moments where the scale of what I was attempting felt overwhelming. What if I failed? What if he discovered my plan before I was ready? The fear was a cold knot in my stomach. But the thought of going back, of shrinking back into the not enough person he wanted me to be, was even more terrifying. Evelyn's quiet confidence was a lifeline. We were in this together now. The climax was meticulously planned. We chose the moment carefully, the closing day for a significant new project he had invested heavily in, a project where some of his past questionable dealings were most vulnerable to scrutiny. He was already under pressure, stressed and slightly manic with the anticipation of another public, when we scheduled a small, mandatory meeting in his office, just the three of us, him, me, and my assistant, Evelyn Miller. The room was tense. He was pacing, rattling off last-minute instructions to me, ignoring Evelyn, who sat quietly to the side, a leather portfolio open on her lap. "Are you ready for the closing, darling?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. "This is it. The culmination of months of my hard work," he emphasized a casual jab. "Yes," I said, my voice level. "I think everything is in order."
"Good.
Just make sure you have those final projections ready. And Evelyn, have you finished sorting that archive I gave you?" he said, addressing her directly for the first time, his tone dismissive. Evelyn looked up. Her expression was unreadable. "The archive is sorted, yes," she said, her voice clear and steady. "And I've found some interesting correlations." He stopped pacing. "Correlations? What are you talking about?" "It's just old files." "Some files are more than just old," she continued, her gaze locked on his. "They tell a story about investment funds that disappeared, about regulations that were bypassed, about people who lost everything." His face began to pale. He looked at me, then back at Evelyn. His bluster faltered. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "That's not your concern. Your job is administrative." Evelyn closed her portfolio with a soft snap. "My job is to assist," she said. "And I assist with bringing things to light. Things like this." She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk towards him. It was a copy of an email, a crucial piece of evidence I had saved, combined with a recent bank record Evelyn had found, connecting him directly to a fraudulent transfer years ago, the one that had ruined her and several others. The email was sent from his account. His eyes scanned the paper. The color drained completely from his face. He recognized the email. He recognized the transaction. He recognized the danger. He looked at me, his eyes wide with accusation, then at Evelyn, his mouth opening and closing like a fish.
"You."
"You're," he whispered, his voice trembling. He finally recognized her, not as my quiet assistant, but as Evelyn, the woman he had destroyed. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The assistant he had hired, the woman he had ignored, was the living embodiment of his past catching up to him. The plot twist wasn't just that I had hired someone. It was who I had hired, and why. Evelyn wasn't just an assistant. She was my partner in retribution, armed with the proof I had gathered over years. His certainty that I wasn't enough, that I couldn't possibly pose a threat, had blinded him completely. He had willingly brought the instrument of his own undoing into his inner circle because he saw her only through the lens of his own condescending assumptions about the kind of people who worked for him. He collapsed because the carefully constructed world where he was untouchable, where his past couldn't hurt him, where I was forever small and insignificant, shattered around him in that instant. He saw not just ruin, but betrayal from the person he had utterly discounted. The victim hadn't just escaped. She had orchestrated his catastrophic downfall using his own arrogance against him. I didn't just win. I won bigger than he could have ever imagined, not just freedom, but vindication, and the potential to rebuild on the ashes of his empire, armed with the very resources he had tried to hide from me. The aftermath was chaotic and swift. The sound of his collapse brought others running, but the damage was done. The paper Evelyn had shown him wasn't the only copy. We had already sent packets of information to the relevant authorities and journalists. The dominoes began to fall almost immediately. Investigations were launched. His name, once synonymous with success, became a byword for scandal. Investors pulled out. Project stalled. His empire, built on a foundation of lies and manipulation, crumbled with astonishing speed. The legal battles were messy, protracted, and emotionally draining. He fought back, of course, his arrogance returning as soon as he recovered, replaced by a desperate, cornered viciousness. He tried to discredit me, to paint me as unstable, vengeful. But the evidence was irrefutable. The meticulous records I had kept, dismissed by him as my obsessive little files, became the backbone of the case against him. Evelyn provided expert testimony, calm and devastatingly effective. In the end, he lost everything. His company, his fortune, his reputation. The legal consequences were severe. He was no longer the charming, untouchable developer. He was just a man facing the consequences of years of deceit. For me, the aftermath was complex. There was relief, a profound sense of lightness from shedding the weight of his control. There was a fierce, quiet satisfaction in having turned the tables so completely. The woman he had deemed not enough had brought his entire world crashing down. But there was also a weariness, a sadness for the years lost, for the person I had almost allowed myself to become. The marriage ended, of course, not with a bang, but with legal documents and cold silence. Evelyn and I didn't part ways. Our collaboration had forged a unique bond. We started a new firm, leveraging our combined expertise, my analytical rigor and her strategic acumen and industry knowledge. We focused on ethical, transparent development, a stark contrast to his methods. We thrived. My quiet competence was no longer hidden. It was the foundation of our success. Evelyn, her reputation restored and amplified by her role in exposing his corruption, became a respected figure again. We built something real, something solid, something that didn't require anyone to be less than they were. The feeling of not enough lingered for a while, a phantom ache. But with every successful project, every deal closed with integrity, every moment I stood tall and spoke my mind without fear of judgment, that feeling faded. I learned that being enough wasn't a state granted by someone else, but a truth I held within myself. His voice, once a powerful force shaping my perception, became a distant, pathetic echo. I walk taller now. I speak louder. My world is vibrant and expanding, filled with purpose and genuine connection. I am not the same woman who stood trembling in his office. I am stronger, clearer, forged in the fire of betrayal and vindication. I am, finally, exactly who I need to be. More than enough. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever felt underestimated or told you weren't enough, I'd love to hear your version in the comments below. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. And thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life.